Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Akshay Sondur and I'm the Director of Marketing at Incref. Incref is the leading provider of technology solutions for retail and e-commerce brand, enabling them to consistently achieve inventory accuracy and supply chain efficiency through best-in-class merchandise planning, allocation, and warehousing solutions. Today, we are here to discuss the topic managing inventory challenges for holiday season sale to avoid stockouts and maximize revenue, presented by Gail Hickey and Anshuman Agarwal. A quick introduction about our speakers. Gail is currently the Director of Planning and Allocation at Bootlegger, and she comes with over 2 decades of experience in merchandising space. She is currently leading a team of experienced planners and allocation analysts and is responsible for improving processes and bringing in efficiency in the merchandising, planning, and allocation at Bootlegger. Just to give you a quick intro about Bootlegger, Bootlegger is a trusted Canadian brand founded in 1971, and Bootlegger's mission from early on was to be the best place for jeans in Canada where you find the perfect fit, quality, and value. Coming back to our second speaker, Anshuman is the co-founder and COO at Incref. He's a sport enthusiast and an entrepreneur at heart. Anshuman also comes with over 2 decades of experience as a strategic leader and technology expert. He brings in an interesting mix of operations and consulting experience to help and retailers improve their inventory efficiency to boost revenue and margins. So that was about our speakers. Just a little.
Thanks, Akshay.
Yeah, thank you, Anshuman.
Welcome, Gail.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Gail and Anshuman, for joining us today. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom panel, and I'll bring them up during our presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. We won't be using this PPT during our webinar today. It will be more of an interaction-based session, and we will highlight actual solutions to address the real-life merchandising problems. So further ado, we'll turn the time over to our presenters. So Gail, I'm going to start with you first. So Gail, my first question to you was, what is the importance of holiday season inventory planning, and can you please highlight how you have been efficiently planning your holiday season inventory at Bootlegger in order to prevent stockouts and maximize sell-throughs?
Yeah, an effective holiday plan, or any plan, depending on what season you happen to be working on, really starts at the hindsight. So, we sort of start obviously from a supply chain perspective, we start, 9 to 12 months out. So, while we're living holiday right now, we're actually already starting to think about, okay, how does this impact next holiday? So the process really starts once we come out of holiday. So come for us here in Canada, come into January, really hindsighting what happened, especially through November, December, in those key times. Where were we good? Where were we bad? What can we improve? What's the data telling us about where the improvement needs to come? So we're really trying to build that out that far in advance, and really trying to take those nuggets, figure out what's interesting, what's actionable, what we actually need to change, and how we can actually do that. I think the better you plan it, the more successful holidays I've had are the ones that you've spent the more time up front, and then you're just managing to whatever happens in season, whatever you weren't expecting to happen, and reacting versus trying to catch up in season, which is never an easy thing when you're going 90 miles an hour in a holiday season. So it really becomes that hindsight meeting, or post-mortem, or whatever people tend to call it, depending on your company, really coming out of the season and taking those learnings and figuring out your actions and what to do go forward is really where it becomes key. And really spending time with the team between, we work very closely with buying, planning, and allocation, are a very tight-knit cross-functional team, and making sure everyone's coming to the table with what they're seeing from what piece they own during the season, and really working through what do the levels need to look like by style, what does the blend need to look like, how many options, did we rank our stores appropriately, all of those pieces, and trying to tie that together as you're building the best plan possible, building the size breaks so that you've got the right size curve based on what you know or what you learned off of the last year, making sure that you've got you didn't have enough stock to replenish, making sure you take up that replenishment level versus putting it all in packs. Or if you had too much replenishment, maybe you put it all up front because you couldn't get out of the DC fast enough. Whatever those key learnings tend to be, really applying those to your plan so that then when you get closer to the season, come August, September, you're really just reacting to what happens. I mean, obviously this year with supply chain, we planned on, based on last year, we reacted and put a lot more into October than we ever would have really figured you should put into 1 month from a receipt perspective. And that sort of helped us in that, goods that last year would have sat in November, didn't come till almost Christmas. Yes, they're still delayed, but now they're delayed to end of October or early November. So we've gotten a little bit ahead of the curve. Of course, the situation with supply chain has gotten worse. So that, it hasn't worked out perfectly, but
hindsight, it worked really well.
Yeah. And then you're just managing. So it starts with hindsight, and then about 2-3 months out, it's really reevaluating that plan and what has changed, and really working with your allocation team, especially with the supply chain issues. Maybe there was stuff that was supposed to go to all stores that now we think, okay, we're not going to have the backup we thought. So, let's select this style goes to this 50 stores, this style goes to this 50 stores, so that you're not going to actually size out across the chain. You're not putting yourself too thin, and reconfiguring what you need to reconfigure based on what has happened and transpired. And then that way in season, you're really just sort of managing to anything that flexes between that. So it's really about working far out and building the best plans and having some scenarios of what could go wrong.
Yeah. Very interesting. As in, Gil, you talked about many interesting pieces here. So for the first thing you said, like you're running at a 90-mile-per-hour speed, and especially during the festive season or a holiday season, you don't have that breathing space. So anything which can go, if it goes wrong, can hurt you really hard. There's no time to recover, time to recapture. Plus the whole fact that you would have limited inventory to replenish or put in the stores. At the same time, even the stores would have limited space, given that designed for a certain planogram or a certain capacity. And in the season or a holiday season, you want to overstock to a certain capacity. I think these three factors, limited inventory and space, fact, they kind of complicated with the fact that you are trying to run at a very, very high speed, makes it more complex to build a plan, far more complex than what you do for the BAU typical month, right? So how do you think about, let's say if you have a limited inventory availability, then how do you plan that which particular SKU or which particular size should go to which point of sale? How do you think about that whole process?
I usually start getting closer to kind of thinking through the in season is the vision of what I want the store to look like in January. So you kind of start of where your end point is, and then you can kind of work backwards. How much sale do I want to be sitting there? How much reg do I want to be sitting there? What in our assortment can live? What in our assortment can't live? So really getting clear on, and of course, it's not just me who does this. Each of my planners do it for each of their categories that they own. But as a collective whole, we're looking at, what are the things that are highly liable that we need to get out of and that we know? So then how do you strategize those? So, those ones need to get out of the DC, or your distribution center, those ones need to be either in store or online ahead of time so that you have runway. And then making sure which ones can live a little bit longer, which ones are core. So a lot of our jeans, your basic white t-shirts, really getting clear on what pieces of the assortment are risk and liable or have an exit date. Like, something with Santa on it gets very stinky fish in January. So a plain white t-shirt, not so much. So it's really about knowing your assortment really well and how it works. And then you can kind of easily plug and play what you need to go deeper on, what you can protect, or what you need to push out to more stores or less stores, and really figure out, you almost need we work through, a bit of an allocation strategy and a planning strategy and a pricing strategy on almost every sort of grouping of style within those kind of buckets, so that we're kind of keeping all those things in mind, and so that we know what our options are to kind of plug and play in the season.
Interesting. No, and just another thought, what we see in markets like India or Middle East, the holiday season revenue contribution has constantly been increasing to the overall annual revenue. As in, if you see this year, the holiday period in India, the Diwali period and all, India saw the retail throughput which broke last 10 years record. Right, so it's becoming really, really critical for the brands to plan season really, really well in terms of the whole merchandise allocation and forward planning and all. How is it panning out in, let's say, US and Canada and countries like that?
Yeah, we're just at the start of it. So November really, like, it's actually today's Remembrance Day and then Veterans Day in the States. So it's kind of like people sort of, this is kind of like the go point. This is the start line. It kind of feels like you hit November 12th and suddenly Christmas trees are up and everything gets going. So it's a little hard to tell, quite yet. I mean, last year we still had closures. We had stores that closed down, 3 days before Christmas, and risks of closures, a lot of COVID restrictions. So last year it got very flat. Like, you still saw lifts between the weeks, but it flattened out along the week, and you didn't see those lifts on Saturdays. Big volume days were tougher because people weren't wanting to do crowds and stuff like that. So it will be interesting to see what happens this year. It does seem like there's a little bit more consumer confidence, that we are seeing traffic come back into the malls, but not to the same level that you would kind of see. So this is kind of the time where it's going to start building. And we are starting to see that build. I don't think it's going to hit back to where it was pre-COVID. I think some of those big days that we count on, like a Black Friday or a Boxing Day, are going to become more like Black Friday weeks and Boxing weeks, to be able to capture people who don't want to shop at peak time. So I think you're going to see the season sort of like where we would have these sort of like big giant days. I think it's going to flatten a little. But I think there's signs that we're starting to see pickups to, especially where we were last year. But we are starting to see that gap between our 2019 numbers kind of dwindle, like we're getting a little bit closer. So there's signs of it, but I don't think it's not panning out, at least in clothing, for the most part, to look like it's panning out quite the way that you guys are seeing. I think if you're in housewares, there's definitely different companies, and there's still some strength within the industry, but it does seem like people are still a little hesitant.
Interesting, because I was speaking a couple of days back to a premium luxury brand in US, and they are a retailer and deal with multiple luxury brands, and they were seeing kind of a very strong rebound and almost like a revenge buying. Right.
Yeah, and I think pieces of the US have seen that. I think, we're in a lot of small towns. So, there's not quite the same sort of like flux of people. I think some of the states, I think we saw a similar thing. We're very strong in Alberta. And when Alberta opened up over the summer, we saw that sort of flocking back to retail sort of thing. I think with COVID numbers starting to go up right now, as we get into the holiday season and flu coming back and those kind of things, that we are starting to see it, see people or hear more nervousness out there. So it's interesting. We're still expecting that we're going to see those big days and that peak be stronger than what we've been seeing, but still cautious, still nervous about how it's like all going to play out.
Well, interestingly, and so the point you raised, right, that certain geographies or certain cities are seeing a better response, and hence your planning for those geographies or cities needs to be different. So in India, we see very similar stuff that given the COVID situation, some of the cities have completely come back to normal, whereas some cities or some geographies are still struggling. And hence the planning becomes more complex, that where do you plan how much of inventory, and where do you kind of take a cautious approach and kind of hold back?
Yeah, we work We work very closely with the operations team, and just obviously they're kind of like the boots on the ground that kind of know how their customers, and we work very close with our field team who can kind of give us those insights. I mean, obviously we're tracking each week by how each region is doing. And so you can get a bit of a trend, and it's been very clear which regions are more comfortable out there. And as you sort of see the COVID numbers increase in places, which ones are a little bit more cautious. So just sort of being aware of that. So we meet, I'm constantly in contact with operations. We work very closely, and then watching the numbers each week of, our allocation team is very aware of how different regions are selling as an overall, not just how their categories are doing, but how regions are doing overall, and keeping the team informed of all of that, and just pivoting where we need to. We carry a lot of replenishment goods, so it's really about leaving ourselves flexible so that everyone kind of has the same assortment to start with, and then you're chasing sales and feeding inventory into the regions that are doing the best for you.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anshuman and Gail, we have got a question, and this question is for Gail. The question says, should we start our sale earlier than Black Friday sale to capture shoppers early on?
It's something to consider for sure. I know, even over the last few years, Black Friday has become more of a Black Friday weekend than an actual one day. And especially for us in Canada, we don't have Thanksgiving on the Thursday, so we don't have the day off. We never really had the holiday that went with it. We just kind of tagged onto the sale part of it. So we've always found that we needed to run it through the weekend. I think you will find a lot more retailers, even from communication I've seen over the last week, talking about Black Friday. I still think you hold your biggest deal for that weekend. I think that's sort of, I still think there's people are in the mood for it. They're kind of ready for it. But I think there's ways you can play with it through the month. So what we've typically done is found sort of different deals to keep it interesting through the month, so that you're still sort of those who want to avoid the stockouts, those customers who want to get it done early. You're still capturing the people that are in the mall and kind of winning it, and figuring and really working on what's the liable goods, or the goods that you need to get out of, and starting there, so that it's also working within a profitability. So you're not kind of giving away the farm early in November, and then you've got nothing left when you head into December, or you just run out of profitability. So it's really about picking those pieces that can speak to a deal, and then how you market it to keep the sort of interest going through the month, because there's a lot of noise out there, and it's going to be sort of the best deal wins, but you've got to find a way to do it in a profitable fashion. So it's really, again, that pre-planning of what of your assortment do you need to get out of, and what of your assortment do you need to protect, and so that you can actually build those deals around the stuff that you need to get out of, which should be at a higher margin too, because you know you have a small window on it, and really speaking to that and working and how you market it. But it's probably a good strategy to have deals or things that you can play with, levers you can pull in your pocket through November, that if you are seeing the sales soften, or you are seeing people in your competitive market go early, that you've got levers to pull. But I still think we'll see the big ones beyond the big days.
Got it. Thanks, Gail.
You talked about how you plan for the promotions or the markdowns and things like that. So just a quick question there. So do you plan kind of flat markdown for a particular product category across stores, or do you plan it different markdowns for different categories in different stores? Is it more store specific? Is it more category specific? How do you plan the markdowns?
It's more category specific than it is store. So we don't usually run different deals by store. We run as a chain. The only differences are differences between channels. So we have bricks and mortar and e-com. So they run different promotions at times, but our bricks and mortar store, we try and keep consistent with the same signage, the same promotions, same deals. Where that differs, of course, is when we were having closures. We had to go Boxing Day early in Ontario because they were closing on Boxing Day. So we do have times where we play it sort of differently. If we get into a position where we're sitting with too much sale in a particular region or store, we sometimes will play with deals, but for the most part, it's more category driven than it is actually region driven. So we do plan the promotional calendar. Again, we start it 9 months out. We start it when we start the investment process so that we know what our base promos are going to be or what we think our promos are going to be. And then we usually have, backup scenarios. And it really comes down to, trying to, what do we need to get out of, what do we want the end of season to look like? What do we not want to carry into the next season? And how do you build a promotional cadence around that piece? For holiday specifically, you kind of start with the big chunks of Canada. We have Boxing Day and then we have Black Friday. So you kind of start with those big chunks of like, where do you want to be there? What do you want to offer? What does that need to look like? And then you kind of fill in the gaps and figure out, what's the drop dead date of something of when you need to mark it down. Sweaters is a good one because it's a very seasonal category, but then you also have core cardigans in there. So you can't always run it on promotion. So how do you get out of the ones with Santa on it? And how do you hold on to the ones that are, core cardigans? So it's really thinking about, what are the pieces or what are the classes that you need to come out of the season at zero in, and the ones that you can, and where's your break point and what are those milestones? Like what inventory do you need to be at week 2 of December that makes that decision of I'm either going to go to a promotion or let it keep promoting, or I'm going to go to a markdown on it. So what are those like key milestones of each of those weeks and how are you tracking to them? And then you've got your backup plans for different scenarios. So we plan different markdown cadences. So we've got markdown entry points in December where we can decide, okay, this stays on promotion or this goes to markdown. And that means we need it to move faster. So we've got sort of predetermined points in time and KPIs built on where certain product needs to be at that time. And then that makes that decision.
Interesting. So one of the experiments we did with couple of brands was they saw different traction or different demand in different geographies for the same category. And hence we tried having different markdown strategies for the same product or same category in different geographies differently. So let's say in one part, it was probably at a 10% discount, whereas in other parts it was 20% discount because of the different demand potential there. And it worked really well, and you kind of drove the similar revenue with a higher margin. So we are seeing this kind of trend picking up that probably not necessarily have to apply the same markdown or same strategy for the entire category, for the entire geography, and kind of play around depending on the demand mix or demand profile. You see that?
Yeah, I think you can, there's definitely opportunity for it. And we've definitely seen, we play with it limitedly, partially because how we operate. We download things to the till. We're a small team, so to try and keep things uniform, and our vision is we have a lot of stores that are in the same cities, and we want the customer experience in BC to be the same customer experience you see in Ontario. That's sort of a brand choice. Yeah. We have played around with it at times. Actually, the year of COVID was kind of like the fun part of COVID was you got to like play around with some of these different things, because I think the customer expectation that everything was the same or everything was going to be perfect really went out the window. There's a lot of forgiveness on the customer demand side. So we did play around with, as different provinces opened, we had different cascading deals so that we could, because they've been closed for 2 or 3 months, we needed to get out of inventory in different rates. Some were closed for a month, some were closed for 4 months. So we had differing needs out there. So yeah, there's definitely opportunity for it if it works within your brand structure or your operational structure and it's easy to execute. It's worked sometimes. There's a few times where we've played around with one of our key denim promotions. We ran in one province and not another, or ran it in 2 different ways in different provinces and didn't actually really see much of a difference. So it's kind of, it works sometimes, but I think it's a fun thing to play around with if you have the ability to do it, because I think it definitely would be, from a profit perspective, most ideal if you could pinpoint exactly where your inventory clog is in a certain product, and just be able to pull levers there. It definitely will will give you a better return on your investment there. Because sometimes there are things where it's slow in 90% of the country, so you got to take it to markdown, but you really wish you could hold off in that small percentage that's really doing well with it.
That's true.
Sure. Anshuman, we have a question for you here.
Okay.
How can brands make data-driven decisions to efficiently allocate inventory and maximize revenue?
I think, just taking cue from what Gail said, right, that you have to plan way ahead of the holiday season in terms of what kind of merchandise mix is required for that season. And it should be done at a store level, not at a city or a region level, because within a city, different stores can have different demand profiles. So doing it at a store level is super critical, especially for the festival season. And one thing which happens during holiday season is your merchandising mix itself changes. What is your typical normal month demand mix versus a holiday season mix can have a different merchandising mix between different categories. So you
True.
need to understand based on your historical sales pattern that for every store, how the mix is changing. One because of holiday or deal period, one because of the seasonality and things like that. The winter season kicking in and stuff like that. The second part of it, which is very critical, is the whole size complexity, right? So during holiday, you're not looking at presenting to the customer the healthy styles. It's more about giving right kind of options and mix at a particular size level for the customer. So your whole planning philosophy changes from style-wise replenishment and placement to a size-wise placement. So you need to change your planning from style to size level mix. The third, I think, which is critical is given limited inventory and limited space, you need to create space in the stores. So work out, let's say, closer to the holiday, that what is the inventory which can be pulled out of the store, which is not going to sell during the holiday season. Create space for the better merchandise and see if that merchandise can be placed in a different store. So do inter-store transfers, create space for the better inventory in the store, right? I think last one, which we have seen many brands do very effectively, is plan the allocation for every style or every size based on true rate of sale and store combination. Many of the brands, when they are doing it on let's say an Excel model, they will try and replenish a style or allocate a style first and look at what are the best stores. But from a store perspective, that style may not be the best. So when you really create a combination or a ranking of store and style together based on the true potential, that's when you get to the optimal mix. So let's say you have 1,000 stores and 1,000 styles, just a hypothetical speaking number. You're literally talking about creating a 1,000 cross 1,000 store style ranking and then picking up the best combination in terms of style and store. And so you're talking about creating 1 million theoretical combinations and rankings based on true potential and then allocate that. So those are typically some of the best practices I have seen across international brands like Puma or Adidas or Celio and others. Gil, you want to add anything to that?
No, yeah, you've really got to look at it that way. And, you know, especially, and that's where automation comes in like really handy when you've got the 1,000 by 1,000. I think when you, because there's no other way. And when you're doing it on Excel, that's a tricky thing. So, you know, I think that's where really looking at how that true rate of sale of that style and, you know, either allocating it from an initial perspective. I mean, we do what's called sort of like presentation stock. Like we want every store to, you know, have this, it's in the poster, that kind of thing. So everybody's going to get an initial, but we're playing with holding more back to be able to like replenish so you can truly impact that rate of sale. So you can really look at how is that style selling by size, by store, run that automation, and then fill from the warehouse to make sure that you're getting that. And then making sure that you're adding in enough weeks of stock or weeks of cover as far as what you need that to look like. Because you got to be, when you're in holiday, you got to be really careful. They sold one, they don't need one. They sold one, they need three, because in the next 3 weeks, by the time you can replenish them again and it gets out, depending on where the stores are located in conjunction to your DC and all those kind of things, you kind of have to know like what those lead times look like. So you know how much you have to push based on that rate of sale as well, or how many weeks you need to cover that rate of sale. So that's a tough thing to do, SKU by SKU, size by size, store by store in Excel. So that's a good thing where automation comes in to be able to really look at those pieces and give you that recommendation of where it should go, and how to best utilize what you've got.
True, and it becomes more complex because sometimes you may like to have different rate of covers or different days of cover, depending on the product and their rate of sale, right? So for a high sell-through product, you would probably have a larger cover because you don't want to run the risk of getting stocked out. Versus other products which are slow selling, you may live with a shorter days of cover. So it adds further complexity that you have, let's say, thousands of products and categories, and your rate of cover itself can be different for different products, right? And different for different stores depending on how far they are from your DC or replenishment center. So that's where the automation or platforms help, that you can kind of literally automate these things, that depending on certain algorithms or certain guidelines, the tool can automatically decide what should be the rate of cover for every store and style combination.
Yeah.
It all comes back to that preseason planning and knowing exactly like what's the exit date of that style, or what's the plan. Like, before we even buy a style, it's a conversation between our cross-functional team of, okay, when does it come in? When is its last delivery? And when do you want to be at 30% sold, 50% sold, 80% sold? So everybody on the team who's touching that product knows sort of what the intent of that product was. And then that way, whether you're automated or not automated, because even if you're automated, you've got to set those parameters. You still need to know, okay, this style needs to be at 0 by the time I get to January. So I got to set parameters that make that happen. So it's really, key knowing the intent or what the vision of each product is.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Yeah. So we have another interesting question around inter-store transfer. And I think Agil and Anshuman, you both can answer this question. The question is doing inter-store transfer a possible way to capitalize on demand? And if yes, how do I make sure I'm doing it right?
Interesting.
It's a tough one to know for sure whether you're doing it right. Are you okay if I start and then you can?
Yeah, please.
Because I think your system has some transfer capability to it, and I think you guys have an automation standpoint to it that is super helpful, and I think a great way. And then I think there's those of us out there who don't have that built in, so they're doing it a little bit more by hand. So in my world, we don't love to transfer product. I'd rather get it right the first time out or hold back in the distribution center so that you're not having to transfer product. Transferring product is, it's expensive from a cost perspective and expensive from a labor perspective. I know when I do transfers and trying to figure out where I need to move inventory within the chain, sometimes it's a day worth of my work or my team's work, depending on who's doing it, to figure out what should go, where it should go, what makes sense. Is it the right size mix, all that kind of stuff. So you're spending, a number of hours yourself. Then you're communicating to the store team. So then you're paying a store team to take those products that have already been shipped out of a DC to you and put on a sales floor that you're then taking out of a sales floor, putting in a box. Then it's off the sales floor for 3 or 4 days, depending on where you're sending it to. And how close the store is. So you kind of have to take into consideration how obvious is the problem, what the price of the problem is. For us, jeans, a markdown on a jean could be $50. Well, the cost of transferring it is $10. So, if we can save the $40, it makes sense. If it's a $9.99 shirt and I'm going to transfer it to a store that's going to sell it for $7.99, and I just spent 6 hours trying to figure out how to make this all work, it's not a good return on investment. So you kind of have to look at what product you're doing it, why you're doing it, and what the situation is. So I think it's something you consider more for higher priced goods or goods that are going to last. It might be on a first markdown, but you can last at that markdown price for 6 months if it's a jean. So it's worth transferring. And also the position of the stores, like, we've had some of our high volume stores as restrictions come off really jump up in sales, and we just don't have the inventory in the distribution center to pivot given supply chain. So, when you've got inventory sitting in a store that's, 2 hours away and our area leader can drive it down, yeah, absolutely, move it 100%. If I have to move it across the country and it's going to take 8 hours of people's time, it's maybe not so much worth it. So there's a lot of factors you kind of have to work through to make sure that you're doing it. But I think if you can justify the hours you're going to spend looking at it, the hours a store team is going to spend, and you can make that money back by transferring it, it's 100% worth it versus taking a further markdown on it. The only other time where you might lose money on a transfer, but it's worth playing with, is if you've got a store that's horribly overstocked and it's sitting with old and sale, and it looks like you've got summer and it's October, and you've got a clearance center, or you've got e-com you can put it into, or any sort of other store that could hold it, or you've got a high capacity store that's low volume that you've got space in, then it's worth it because you're just going to see a higher return off the rank price in that store. So yes, you're going to lose money on this chunk you just transferred, but they're going to be able to take that rack and put your beautiful new goods on it at the front of the store, and you're going to sell that stuff faster. Whereas when you're too heavy in sale or older goods, the customer's not going to see that good stuff, so you're not actually going to sell that either. So there's a time where on it, what you're actually transferring, you're losing money on, but it's sort of like you're sacrificing that for the greater good of the store.
Yeah, no, I think you covered practically all the use cases or pros and cons of doing this. I think I'll just add one more to it, which was very interesting anecdote we heard from a brand. And the CEO basically said that, look, if you are trying or over managing your bestsellers or core, you may actually end up killing your brand, because you may not have the freshness in the store when your customers revisit. So many brands kind of also give a lot of importance to what is the freshness index, or how many styles are fresh and less than 2 months old when a customer comes in. Because if the customer is repeating and coming again and again, and if they see the same styles, it kind of puts them off. So even though, let's say, the store may be selling well a particular style, but just to maintain the freshness index of it, you may pull out certain inventory and give them a fresh stock just to kind of maintain the customer experience and the overall feel of the store.
Yeah, and that's key in like your low volume, or at least for us, or what we found is in our low volume stores who aren't necessarily going to sell through it as quickly because they just don't have the traffic. They're in small markets.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're not trying, or they're not like, good little engines that are doing the best they can, but they're just not going to sell through, all of it, but you want them to have the full presentation. So, there's times for that, again, that you're kind of sacrificing, maybe they're not showing that they necessarily need to transfer it, but if it allows you to make sure that you can keep freshness in there, if you're making a choice of, well, do I move this out or do I put this fresh good in, always move the product out, put the fresh in, because you're going to give them, they've already sold through what they're likely going to sell through with that older product. You're not giving them their best chance if you're not giving them new.
True.
Yeah.
No, and the point you raised, right, that managing so many guardrails and so many complexities, that who can be the donor stores, who can be the receiving stores, and kind of what is the combination of stores you can play around with, makes it so complex that doing it manually or on Excel files becomes too cumbersome, and too much of time gets consumed in that. So sometimes it's just not worth spending that much effort, and the return is not that high. So automating that process so that it just makes life easier for the managers or store planners, and if things can be automated, then this can be a more frequent exercise to maintain the hygiene of the inventory in the stores.
Yeah. Thanks, Gail and Anshuman, for explaining it so nicely. We again have a couple of more questions. One question is again, this question is again for Gail. With online becoming big, how do you handle quicker deliveries to your customers?
Do you mean like quicker deliveries like out of the DC? I mean, we have a pretty quick turnaround time. I mean, our turnaround time of how it gets to the customer kind of depends on our shipping partners. So if we go through Canada Post and Pure later, so if they're backed up, there's not much we can do. But really what we're trying to do is, it comes to forecasting and working really closely with your distribution center and your DC manager and your e-com manager, and knowing what those sales are going to look like, giving your distribution center the heads up on, if you're pulling a big lever on e-com and you're going 50 off the site or something, giving them the heads up so that they're staffing appropriately, so that they know exactly how many people they need to be putting on, and so that they can turn those goods around as quickly as humanly possible. I mean, it's only so fast people will go. But again, it comes back to really thinking through, like, what does it look like? Like I talked to our e-com or distribution manager, like, I mean, I do end up talking to him weekly, but we have, touch bases every second week. And I'm going through, like, what do the forecasts look like for the next couple of weeks? Where are there going to be peaks? Where are there going to be valleys? Am I sending you transfers? Am I doing this? What is the workload going to look like? So that he's fully prepared and he has people in place so that they don't find themselves short. He's staffing, putting on extra staff for this holiday time period. So he knows ahead of time how many orders we think we're going to get through this time period. So he knows how many extra staff he needs to pull, how many extra shifts he needs to add on. They extend their hours. So it's really being, clear with your partners, whether it's a DC that is part of your company or it's a third party. Being really clear with them and having communication so that they know exactly what to expect. And that will get you closer to making sure that you're getting it in and out of the distribution center as quickly as possible from the time that they order. I mean, we try and be within, we're sort of within 24 hours of ordering to getting it out the door as much as we can possibly control. So, and it helps when you've got history of e-com and you kind of know where those peaks and valleys are going to be. But if you're planning on doing something different from previous years, just being clear with the team so that they can plan as well.
Interesting. So, Gil, what we have seen a couple of very interesting trends in India is now marketplaces like Amazon and all, they're trying something like a 2-hour delivery or a 2-hour SLA. So the order comes in at 12, the order should be shipped out by 2 and get delivered within same day or next day at best, right? Those are the things which brings in additional challenges that, let's say, how do you treat these priority orders separately and the regular orders separately, and how's your warehouse operations SOPs and the tech designed to handle these separate orders in a kind of green channel and things like that. Those things are picking up in India pretty aggressively, and I don't know how is it in Canada. Is that a trend?
You obviously have your Amazons and they are doing things like that. I think I wouldn't say I'm seeing it a lot in clothing. What you're seeing more is the whole like buy online, pick up in store. So being able to make a purchase right now online, have it reserved, and be able to go into a store and just pick it up. So I don't actually have to have it shipped. I don't actually have to worry about whether or not it's going to make it. I can just walk into the store and I don't have to deal with finding it in the store. Someone's already gone and found it. I just walk up to the counter, here's my order number, and walk back out, and making it easier. So I think with clothing, you're definitely seeing that pick up more and making that a little bit easier for the customer experience versus like the trying to fulfill it in 2 hours. I think, especially in the market we play in, we're definitely never going to be there. We're not a big enough retailer. I think you'll probably see like more electronics and Amazon, Best Buys, like those kind of places will probably be the places that go there. I think for us, it's more about how do we make it easier for the customer to use whatever inventory we have. Sold out online, find it in store. Sold out in store, okay, we can ship it to you. We also have ship to store. So, using those kind of options that just make it a little bit faster as well. But yeah, you're starting to see it pick up in some places. But yeah, I think it'll be hard for a lot of brands to completely jump on that bandwagon because it does put a lot of pressure on. You've got to really know what those exit times look like, what those courier services look like. And I think, for someone who has one distribution center that services the country, it's not something we're ever going to be able to guarantee. But I think that's where, if that's the position you want to make, there's definitely different ways you're going to have to operate from a warehouse perspective.
Interesting. And just another add-on question to that. So what we are seeing in India is store fulfillment of online orders is becoming quite meaningful and chunky. So for some of the brands, stores are fulfilling almost 10 to 15% of their orders online. Customers are placing order online, and then the store is fulfilling. The closest store is fulfilling the orders,
Yeah.
and it's growing at a pretty rapid pace and kind of becoming tricky for the stores to handle their of physical customers and also manage the online orders. So how is the trend you see in Canada? As in, is it different or is it kind of picking up?
Yeah, it's definitely out there. It's definitely picking up. I mean, even just from a personal perspective, I know some of the stuff I ordered from my kids for the last year have been coming, and especially during COVID, came directly from a store. Like you'd order 2 items, and one would come from Ontario, and one would come from BC somewhere. So they're fulfilling it from whatever store had the most inventory. I think it's an interesting concept. I think it really requires some hard thinking about what are the parameters that you want to set. Like I know, from what I've heard, Maurice is in the States, does a really good job with it and has some really great algorithms built in, and can really easily tell which store that order should be diverted to, and puts thresholds in. And I think the thresholds are the key piece of like, okay, from a staffing perspective, they're going to get this many more hours, and this store could handle their existing customers plus 5 orders or plus 10 or whatever that number is. And then the algorithm actually will stop
pushing orders
filling there once they reach that. So really getting, you kind of have to really think about what does the store capacity look like? What does the staffing look like? How can they make sure that they're servicing both so that you're not just dumping 50 orders in a day on a store that has 2 people working, and being clear on what that is. So even if you're not going into an order management system, if you're going to try and sort of homegrown it, I know some of the questions that have come up as in conversations I've had with people as we talk about it is, what does that number look like, and how do you make sure that there's safe walls so that you don't overload a store, and how do you work with operations to make sure that it still works out to be a seamless experience? Because obviously the more you can give exposure to any of the inventory you own, like if I can sell stuff sitting in my little store in the middle of up north BC that I can actually get out of the store to a customer versus a transfer, that's going to be a win-win for the customer, for me, for everybody. So it's definitely starting to pick up speed. But I think that how is the big question now.
One of the interesting things we built into our tool was capability to give an option to the store manager or the store operator to switch off or switch on his store.
Okay.
Let's say you have already 10 orders and you're full, your capacity is already choked. Then you can just switch off your store and immediately no more orders will get diverted to your store. Or let's say you are having certain kind of operational challenges. City is having a lockdown or your staff is kind of not reported today. So you can kind of play around your operational hours for online exposure at your convenience so that you manage both your offline orders as well as online orders as per what you can handle. So rather than trying to apply logic and automate things, just give the option to the store itself to decide what they want to do and how much they want to do. Interesting.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Yeah.
Actually, just a quick time check. So we have around 5 odd minutes. So if there are a few more questions, you can pick them up.
Yeah. So I think we have one more question, and this is again on the topic of innovation. Since we have been talking about innovation in merchandising, so are there any trends that you're observing, or any of the innovations that you have recently observed in the merchandising space? So again, Gail and Anshuman, you both can answer this question.
Well, you kind of take more of this one just because you're kind of more the innovator. I'm kind of the recipient of innovation as far as it.
I think one of the biggest innovation which has happened in recent times is availability of technology at a lower cost. So earlier, if I see most of the merchandising platforms or the warehouse or DC fulfillment platforms, They were big box solutions coming at a very high upfront investment, longer deployment cycles, and all, which makes it very difficult for brands to deploy, test it out, and experiment with it. The biggest innovation which has happened, at least in my point of view, is now there are technologies available which are lighter to deploy, faster to deploy, and you can completely be remotely deploy on cloud kind of stuff, which makes it easier for brands and retailers to experiment with newer technology, see what is working for them, and then decide how they want to scale it up, do full rollouts and stuff like that. Right. Plus, now many of the technologies are becoming more and more domain specific. So let's say if I'm talking about whole merchandise planning and replenishment, now you have, earlier it was more a horizontal solution, so which can fit for FMCG or a fashion and a auto also. But now there are technologies which are very specific to sectors. So there are merchandising technologies or platforms which are very fashion centric versus very FMCG or white goods centric, right? So because both have very different requirements, so they can handle, if they go deep, they can handle those edge cases, use cases much better than a horizontal platform.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're a little bit more on we're not investing as much from a technology perspective, but where we are sort of spending that focus is on the e-com side, is on the omni-channel side piece, and yeah, like you said, you're finding, a lot of the solutions that we're looking at or that come to us are cloud-based, are easier to implement, can sort of work and integrate. It feels like integration between systems is a lot easier than it has been in past years, and so you can kind of work with what you already got and kind of fill the gap, versus having to rebuild an entire thing like you would have had to in the past, or were moved completely from one system to another. So there's a lot of the whole world of apps and different things that can kind of fill the gaps you're looking for versus rebuilding. So it's easy to pop in and you find things that can help your business without
exactly.
huge investment.
You basically bring in experts in their domain and kind of let them talk to each other. So if, let's say, the platforms which can do logistics optimization really well versus there are platforms which can do, let's say, warehouse operations and optimization well. So instead of having a single player providing both the solutions, you can get the best of the two worlds and let them talk to each other through integrations, which are now a lot easier. Right? So get the best of technology in each segment and build these pieces like a jigsaw puzzle rather than trying to get a one big box solution which can do everything like an ERP, which was the legacy approach, right?
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Anshuman, and thanks, Gail. I think we have answered quite a few questions, and let's wait for a couple of more minutes. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to help. We'll just wait for a couple of more minutes, and then we can wrap the session. Meanwhile, I'm also putting our email ID in the chat box. If you have any questions or would like to understand more about merchandise planning, how to efficiently manage your merchandise planning allocation, you can just shoot an email to us and we will be happy to help you with the solutions. So here is the email address. So I think
Gail, I just saw that Bootlegger is celebrating 50 years.
Yeah, yeah, we turned 50. 50 is the new thing. We are. Yeah, it's crazy. It's we've done a lot of celebrations for it, a big marketing campaign, a big push behind it. Got a lot of engagement, worked with influencers, and was a big thing. It was, I mean, I've been a part of this brand since I was 19 years old. So I've been with this brand for 21 years. So I've been here for almost half of the brand's existence.
Wow.
So, it's been a big part of my life. So it was a very proud year to see it all kind of come to fruition, especially after such a tough year. And and to see us, starting to rebuild after the challenging year that retail has kind of had. And I think, 50 years, we've looked different ways and we've done a lot of different things, but to be able to say we're still standing after 50 years, I think is a pretty impressive feat in retail. So yeah, it's been a big year for us.
Yeah, congratulations.
Big congratulations, the entire team.
Yeah, it's been a great brand to be a part of. I love jeans, so that helps.
Lovely.
Yeah. So there are no more questions, I think, so I think it was a really great session. And thank you, Gail and Anshuman, for taking out your time and answering all the questions and sharing the insights. I think I hope the audience enjoyed listening to you guys, and they got some actionable takeaways from today's session.
No, Gail, it was big thanks to you. It was really engaging and very interesting session. So thanks a lot for it.
Thanks for inviting me. I could talk about inventory for hours. Not that everybody wants me, but I could.
Lovely.
Okay. So
thanks, Gail. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks, Akshay.
Thanks, Anshuman. Thanks, Gail.
Thanks, everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And hope to see you all in our upcoming webinar sessions as well. Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.